Hey, Alvin, thank you for coming in. You've got an incredible history of accomplishment from scholarship, like top student, and all of your graduate work, and of course, all of your innovative invention work. Definitely an entrepreneur, funding startups as well, and then working with like one of the premier AR, VR, extended reality companies in the world, and leading many of the things they've done as well. I mean, it's just an incredible history of just awesome work. Plus, you got this great bestseller, our next reality. I mean, so thank you for coming in and sharing insights with our audience.
No, thanks for inviting me, Stephen. It was really fun to have met you in Prague and had our long conversations. I really had a lot of insights from both your talk as well as our discussion. So I'm looking forward to chatting and seeing what we can discuss that will be helpful to your audience.
Well, it's interesting, Alvin. You were telling me in Prague, maybe change your keynote a bit. I did in Singapore. I did two
Oh,
keynotes, and I changed them so I didn't use the 2 million years. I just said, past human history. I recut the videos and things like that. Took even more of the data out, and you know what? I would say I always get good responses, by the way. I always get ranked really well, but I could tell from the reaction of the audience they like this even better. So, so I listened to
that
you.
that
I followed your advice.
that's amazing. Well, that shows humility because so many people are afraid to change and they're afraid to take advice because they feel like they know everything. But this even with how much you know and how up to date you are, you're still open to change. That is I'm impressed. It's a good
Yeah,
sign.
I followed every piece of advice you gave me, and it worked. So,
Well,
okay, so
thank
let's go
well,
on. Let's go on to
yes.
the our sort of interview. Now, so it's now public, right? That
Yeah.
you're not only a tech genius, an entrepreneur genius, AR VR genius. I mean, you're a business genius, but you're also a presentation genius. So, anyways, let's get back to you. You have this remarkable career. It's actually quite rare. All of these different. In fact, I've never met anybody with all of the different elements that you have. And I've done my third interview with John Hennessy. So even him, I think you're really quite unique in what you're doing. What were the inflection points that made this wonderful life that you have? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old, inside, outside the family, etc. So,
Probably the biggest inflection point was in 1980. My whole family was able to immigrate from China to America, and I think that changed my entire trajectory. Being opened up to a completely new education model and new business opportunities that is associated with the U.S. And U.S. is seen as the place where you can go and realize your dreams. And and remember, so China, the word for U.S. is makeable. It's actually a beautiful country. So in my mind, I had when my parents said, "Oh, we're immigrating to the U.S." I was thinking everything is going to be these giant skyscrapers and beautiful, clean roads and everything. And I experienced like, oh, it's a city. It's not that different, but I think more in terms of the opportunities it opened, it was very different because in China things are much, at least when I was there in 1970s, it was a I guess still developing country, and also the opportunities were fairly limited because this was essentially pre the boom that's happened in the last 30 years. But the U.S. is a much more mature country where you can essentially by working hard get things happen. Uh, and there's a lot of truth to that, and this is also why it's attracted some of the best minds in the world. And I think that's also what's really created America's rise is the immigrant class, where people who are hungry who come here, they want to make something of themselves or something for their kids. And when I arrived, my dad specifically said, "Look, where you and your mom and I are both are both artists. We have no money, so the only way that you're going to go to a good school and do well in your career is that you work hard and get scholarships because we can't pay for it." And I think that motivated both my brother and I, and we just really worked hard because we knew we had to depend on ourselves. Um, And I think that change, and then he also said, every person has a duty to leave the world better than when you came. So you need to find what it is that you can do best that can create a positive impact on the world. And I gravitated towards technology. So I've essentially been coding since I was 9, and I've been essentially also working for everything since I was 9 because we had no money as a family. So, my first computer, my first TV, my first bike, my first car, everything was because of the side jobs I was doing to make that happen. And I think when you work hard for what you have, you appreciate it. And when you have to work and do sports and do school, you learn how to manage your time. And when you have an appreciation for what you have, and when you are able to be highly productive with your time, you can get a lot done. So that I think that was the turning point. And of course, being in the US, just opportunities start to unfold on themselves if you are doing the right things.
Well, that's it's an awakening for you. You talk about moving from China to the U.S. and you realize that the U.S., that promise that you can kind of make your future, right, by working hard. And as you indicated, your parents are more artistic, so they said to you, "Hey, you got to do it on your own." And so you worked jobs, you really worked hard at school. Did your interest in the technology then even was there when you were in high school and things like that? Or in other words, how old were you when you moved over?
So I was 9, or actually turning 9 when I moved over, so fairly young. But it was actually before high school. Even in elementary school, I was working a essentially paper route job, and took that money to with my brother, and we bought our first was it AS400 computer, or Commodore 64 computer,
Right, right.
which then we started to learn to code, and also playing games, and going online to the BBS and downloading things, and I really started to gravitate to see, wow, this is a device I have on my table that is allowing me to connect to the world, and I can actually control what happens with it, and my work, my efforts can be shown on the screen, and that gave me a lot of sense of control and self gratification that within just my own powers, I can create a little mini game that I can play and I can share with my friends, and that sparked an interest, and I just felt like this is what I want to do. And I've been in tech my entire life. Essentially every generation of computer I've been involved in, whether in developing for it, or developing the chips for it, or developing the system, the software or security for it, or the networks for it, so or the accessories for it. So so it's nice to have gone through these multiple cycles of technology revolution over the last 4 decades,
You
and
know,
have been directly involved. And I'm very gratified that I have this opportunity.
wow. I mean, I can recall all of those days too, right? Because I actually worked on chips. I used to just build these little, not even chips, transistor, JK flip-flops and binary circuits and things. And then we got into integrated circuits. But before that, I used to hard code through wiring. So,
Yeah.
so it's kind of
Yeah,
amazing.
well, actually, my senior project in college was I had initially created a whole breadboard for a voice recognition control system. So we were doing natural language voice recognition using special chips. I was wiring on a whole breadboard, this giant breadboard with hundreds of chips, and then we took that breadboard design and we shipped it out to have it getting it printed on a PCB. So, but the fact that you had to do your own wiring, you had to do your own assembly language to code each of these microchips, uh, it teaches you so much discipline, right? And it teaches you that you can actually, with your own hands, actually, you don't even need a factory. You can make these logic systems work. It's I don't think kids these days appreciate what it was like then.
Yeah, in fact, I even coded before assembly, so it was like punching in the actual binary code, and so
Yeah, I
that
mean,
was fun.
your generation is even one ahead of mine. But I might have outdone you because I used to do microcoding for the actual
Microcoding.
GPUs or
I never
CPUs
done that.
CPUs themselves. Yes. So, um, yeah, because I worked with IBM and Intel doing
Right.
chip design and system design, system architecture, CPU architecture, and so forth. So, it's just having worked in all those layers from chips to boards, to platforms, to enterprise software, to web systems, to mobile, and then recently to the immersive technology space. It's really gratifying to see how much technology has changed over a relatively short time. One person's lifetime to see where we've gone and what's now possible with AI. And I'm looking ahead to see what's coming the next 10 years. And I think we are heading into a rapidly changing that could have a huge potential for good or potentially for something bad. And we don't know where it's going right now. But whatever it is, it will be something that has a big magnitude.
So still go in this sort of chronological journey. So you're 9, you got a Commodore 64, you're able to code it and code it at a really kind of a fundamental level as well, or you have this fundamental understanding how these things work. And that would be like early 80s, I guess. And so you had this interest in elementary school to high school in science and mathematics and things like that. And you end up going to the University of Washington, but you graduated at the top of your class with a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. So that's pretty good.
Uh, and definitely at the time was the hardest major. So and it was actually kind of funny. I was choosing between going to aeronautics or double E because Boeing is based in Seattle, as you know,
Right.
and so there's a lot of pride of being doing something with Boeing, and I was applying for an internship, and I had one internship with IBM to help design the Power PC chip, and the other internship was with Boeing to work on I think the B-1 bomber, and and when I was interviewing for the B-1 bomber job, they says, well, when you come in, you'll be in a room that has no windows. You can't talk to anybody about anything that you've ever done in here.
Right.
And even after you leave, you can't talk about it. I'm like, that doesn't sound very fun. So I'm gonna go and work on a chip within IBM with IBM instead. So and that kind of changed my trajectory. So you were talking about another trajectory change because I could have gone, towards more the aeronautics space, and I could be working in defense right now probably. Whereas when I went to IBM, that kind of started my route towards the computing and CPU um, type of that path towards the PC and internet path. So
Yeah, and I would say in the engineering area, other than engineering physics, which would have more math, EE is the second most math sort of focused area of engineering. So usually the EE guys are, they're the kind of the elite, and usually engineering physics, you're going into research. So I mean, you could do it with the EE as well. But to graduate at the top of your class means you're probably pretty good at math, or not probably, you're very good at math. But then you went on to MIT and you got a master's there. So talk about that journey, and you also got an MIT degree in management. And then we'll get into some of your career moves, and then we'll go up to the present, and then we'll talk about the future and your book.
wow, you've got it all planned out. I'm just gonna follow your lead. Yeah, I mean, MIT was an amazing experience because there's just essentially the smartest kids in the world are there, and the smartest professors in the world are there. And they have more than 50 Nobel Prize winning professors there. That's more than most countries combined. And every corner you go to, there's so much history, and I was just so lucky, I think, to be accepted into that program. It was a dual degree master's program, and it was a full ride scholarship fellowship, um, because they wanted they wanted to create more people in America that had both business understanding and technical background, and particularly to compete with what they thought was the threat of the Asia rise from Japan. So there's this program called the Leaders for Manufacturing program, which is now called, I think, Leaders for Global Operations or something. So you have to do a dual degree program, and you have to do one engineering and also one business. And within 2 years, you get both degrees. But essentially, it's you do all the work that normally the top students in the world would do, only one of those, and they would have a tough time. And we had to do all of that in 2 years, including writing a thesis, and doing a 6-month project with one of the sponsor companies. So it was essentially 7 days a week for a little over 2 years, and you sleep probably 3 or 4 hours a day. So, and there was really no time for anything outside of schoolwork. I found that to be probably one of the hardest times in my life, because it was so demanding, and particularly during the period where I was doing my project, which was running Intel's new Intel Line Services organization in Asia. And so I was traveling between Asia, the West Coast of the US, and the East Coast of the US almost every week, while doing a startup on the side that I was leading 2 of these business plan competition teams. And both of them got into the finals. One of them got funded when I graduated. But to essentially be raising money, running an organization, writing a thesis, and then completing classes and traveling every week between 3 different coasts on 2 different continents. I think once you've done something like that, then almost everything else that you do in life feels kind of easy.
Right.
So I think it definitely prepared me for what was going to happen after, in terms of the difficulties of having a startup and the difficulties of raising money. And I graduated right at the beginning of the bubble bursting for the internet. So the internet crash was March 2000, and I was funded for my startup when I graduated in May of 2000. So it was already started to crash, and so I was able to recruit some team members and people, classmates from MIT, and we started this company that was essentially using AI to evaluate the long-term value of customers online, so that we can help e-commerce companies better attract the right customers. And we can predict just by a few transactions and a few records on your search what your long-term value is as a customer, and then allow these vendors to be able to know how much effort should I put into recruiting them, because we all know 5% of your customers determines like 90% of your profitability. So if you can early decide who are those 5%, you can make extra effort. And we actually built a product that worked. And I was so proud of what we did with a relatively small team. But then this crash of the internet was this macro picture that happened around us, where all of our customers started one by one going out of business. So that was a very difficult time, I think, for the entire internet and computing space. But as a service provider to those customers, it was even more difficult, because every week you had a different person working with you, because the last group just got laid off, and then they started not paying their bills. It was just, but again, I think those are kind of the times where you learn so much as a entrepreneur, as an individual, because the more challenge that you get, the more creative you have to be with your resources and with your team, and how you manage and how you motivate and how you manage cash. There's so many things that you learn from there. I probably learned more in that year, running that company, than I did in the 2 years I was, with MIT. And the MIT was probably more than the 7 years I did with Intel. So you're kind of compressing learning at every step you go. So I don't know. My answer, I was a little bit long rambling to your question.
Yeah, we're going to step a little bit outside of the chronological, because you talked about the entrepreneurial experience. I mean, you founded 4 venture-backed startups across sectors, like your AI-driven conversational search. In 2005, you have the mobile social networks. In 2008, the AR local search. In 2010, the big data and AI analytics. I guess that was prior, in 2000. Spanning both China and the US, and you've been an active investor in over 100 startups, and you were pivotal in creating this accelerator for HTC. So because you've got all of this entrepreneurial experience, what led you? So because of your background, top of the class, MIT, I guess you got the business and the internship, which is very industry kind of practical focused, translational focused. Is that what spurred you on to say, you know what, I'm an entrepreneur too?
No, actually, I was actually an entrepreneur in undergrad. So I paid for a lot of the costs of
Oh,
my
right.
schooling during undergrad, doing a startup with my dorm mate, actually. So
Okay.
we were doing a system integration, custom programming, and PC network integration company out of our dorm. We were, ordering supplies from Taiwan and from Silicon Valley, building computers, shipping them out to these small, medium businesses, and helping them link together networks and do custom programming to pay for a lot of the costs of going to college. So I was already an entrepreneur in undergrad. And then also, even within like Intel, when I went to Intel, the projects I worked on were entrepreneurship projects where, I helped start up the office in China in 1994. I was sent after, a year and a half in
Wow.
the US. I was sent to China with two other expats, and they said, open up our China office. And I was, I think, 23 or 24 at the time, but I started then hiring a team, and I was younger and less educated than everybody that worked for me. But just because I was lucky that I spoke Chinese and I came from headquarters, I was given that responsibility, and to build essentially a new office and a new business. And I made this 20-page plan to the GM of the China office. I said, hey, the consumer market here is right now zero, but look at how many people we have. We can make this business really big, and here's a plan how we can do it. And they said, okay, well, go lead that, right? And for him to trust a 23, 24-year-old to do something like that, I was given a lot of trust, right? So I was doing things that was above my weight, above my knowledge and experience, but I think those are the kind of things that change your trajectory again, because if you leverage those opportunities, and everybody gets those opportunities once in a while, and if you're able to perform at that, then you've actually raised your own level and raised other people's belief in your ability to execute at that level. So essentially, I started a new team, a new business. I went and met with all of the local all local OEMs that were building these systems, and I said, hey, you guys should be making consumer PCs. Although at the time there was no consumer PCs in the market, there's only IBM Compact and I think maybe Dell, and they were $2,000-3,000 in a place where the average income was a few $100s, right, per year. And I said, hey, we need to get these prices down. We need to get more multimedia content, educational content. Can you work with us to do this now? And they somehow listened to me, and they started to follow these plans that I gave, and I helped to bring in motherboards, and we started selling chips, kind of bare chips to these smaller OEMs, and actually later on to mom and pop shops that then just did full integration, and they created these white boxes that were selling at the end for about $500. So we went from $2,000-3,000 to $500, and instead of making $1,000 margin, which they used to make at these business to business oriented stores, these consumer mom and pop shops are making $50 to profit, and they would integrate it all together, deliver it to somebody's house, and set it up for them, right? And so then I brought in all of the content. So I went to some of the biggest educational and consumer and multimedia content developers in the West, and I said, bring your stuff to China. I'll integrate, I'll put it and bundle it with these systems, and we made something called the home CD. And so I created this matchmaking project where I had local developers help translate and localize all these international software. We got rights to China. We were paying 25 cents per copy to the international guys, and we helped pay for the translation costs to the local guys. So we essentially just kind of uh, helped to fuel that initial drive for the business. And I went to people like Legend Computers, which is now Lenovo, which later bought IBM. It's kind of funny that went back around, or IBM's PC division.
Right.
But the guy who's now the chairman used to be the department manager. And it was a small department who was selling a few PCs a year at the time, or maybe a few hundred PCs. And when I gave him the plan, he actually followed it. And by the time I left 3 years ago, he was the number one PC manufacturer in China and selling multimedia home computers. So
Right.
it's and then he's the chairman, right? Now he's the chairman of the entire Legend computer or Lenovo group. So to happen through that, I thought that was really I had some little bit of impact in terms of that trajectory of that marketplace. In fact, here's another funny story. Um, so Xiaomi, the chairman of Xiaomi, Lei Jun, he used to be a software entrepreneur that was making a digital dictionary. So I funded him with $200,000 and 50 PCs from Intel to say, here's some things to help you develop these dictionaries. Because learning language and being able to translate is one of the most important things that you can do with computers at the time, because there wasn't that many things like that. And then he later on went and did a lot of things, and now has one of the largest electronics companies in the world. So so having some influence on people like that, and at the age I was, I felt like I was put into the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean each one of those stories could be a book, right? Because so this interview is like 50 books. That's
I
actually
don't know
quite
about that.
incredible.
No,
Oh,
again, I just think I was very lucky. So and it's
yeah,
just
but
that
it's
people
talent
believed in
too.
me.
Yeah, but it's drive, talent, right? And being sort of growth oriented and not putting boundaries on yourself, right? And I find that in remarkable people. So I mean, clearly you're very remarkable in everything that you touch. So let's kind of think about some of the lessons, because you clearly be involved in investing, creating startups, even from an undergrad days, even earlier, because you're making money to pay for everything, right? So you're basically an entrepreneur, really your entire life, right? And then you've done it in a more formal sense. What lessons would you want to pass on to my audience who could be budding entrepreneurs, maybe a scientist somewhere or an engineer, and they're thinking, "Hey, I got an idea, and now I'm going to raise 10 million on a 100 million valuation on an idea." I mean, what advice would you give that makes for success, and what kind of attributes are required to make for that kind of success?
Yeah. So I definitely gone through a lot of the pains of entrepreneurship. So I know what it's like to be in those early stages and also later stages. And um, I think one of the biggest lessons is proper cash management. And even when you have a lot of cash, don't necessarily spend everything you have. And even if your VCs or investors say, spend more, because this is kind of like, somebody that like Masa-san from SoftBank, his thing is, oh, I talk to somebody for 10 minutes, I give him $100 million, and I tell him to spend it all in the next few years. I'm not sure if that's the best advice. It may give you some big wins, but it also gives, as he saw with like we work, there's some big downsides as well, right? But I think for the average entrepreneur, well, first of all, you have to say, are you really an entrepreneur? Don't just, not everybody's suited to be an entrepreneur, and not everybody can be successful in entrepreneur. If you don't like pressure, if you don't like uncertainty, if you don't like being on the edge of being broke every week and having to go out and raise money and recruit and sell, then you're probably not suited for the entrepreneurship and or to be an entrepreneur, because some people just work better, and it's good that way, that the world has different types of people that are suited for different roles and at different levels. And even if you're an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily have to be the CEO. Because that's the other thing. A lot of people think only the CEO is an entrepreneur. Actually, no, their entire executive team, it is critical for them to be successful. And sometimes being the number 2 or number 3 person in the company can contribute as much to the success as being the CEO. And you can also get very wealthy or very successful from that. I guess the other thing is when be careful who you raise money from, because I raised money from the wrong people before, and people, once they give you money, they feel entitled to tell you what to do. And unfortunately, I would say most people who are in angel investors and are actually, they actually have done things, but most VCs, or a lot, at least traditionally, have been from either the finance or the legal side and haven't done companies themselves. And they really don't have enough on the ground experience to tell you for something that you spend 24 hours a day thinking about. They're spending 1 hour a week out of their portfolio to look at your stuff. They don't really have the depth of knowledge to tell you how to run your business. So make sure you have somebody who is able to be aligned with you in terms of your goals, and who will give you the free reign to do some of the right things. And I've had disagreements with VCs or with my investors, but a lot of times they'll say, hey, I don't agree with what you're doing, but this is on you. You make the decision. I will, I'm not going to go against you. And I'm like, that's all I want. I don't need you to tell me, but I will take responsibility. If I make this decision and it doesn't work, it is on me. And be willing to say it is on me, because a lot of people will say, well, I don't really want to take responsibility, so I'm just going to listen to them. And if it doesn't work, then it's their fault. But you know what? If it doesn't work, it's your company, and your company may fail, or maybe slow down, or maybe beaten by a competition or whatever, right? So your business, your market, your customers, and that's the other thing, is you have to spend time talking to your customers. A lot of entrepreneurs, they sit in the lab or in their office, and they're trying to build the perfect product, and they don't get it tested, and they don't want to share, because they're like, oh, I don't want to let people know what I'm doing, because I've got this secret sauce thing. And there is no secret sauce. You know what? Because at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is your ability to execute. And if you don't share what you're doing with smart people and get feedback, whether it's customers or investors or partners, then you're not going to get the real knowledge of how the response is from the customer and from the market. And so you have to go out, you have to let people try it, even if it's not ready, and be humble enough to listen. Because some people will say, hey, this doesn't work because of that or that, and then you'll be tempted to say, oh, but no, you just don't understand it. Here with all the reasons why this is really great. And a lot of times your customers know, because they deal with the problem you're trying to solve every day, right? And maybe it's their misunderstanding how you're doing it, or maybe you can make a tweak in how you sell it, or how you position it, or how you use it, or what the form factors, or the user experience. Some minor tweaks might completely change their willingness to use or buy what you have. And those things you don't know until you actually get it out there, right? So don't be afraid to let people try. And you'll all, from almost every discussion, you'll learn something, whether good or bad. And then some of it may just reinforce what you already know, which is amazing. And the other thing is, make sure you pick your team very, very carefully, and hire slowly, fire quickly. And that was an advice I got from a mentor of mine, which I did not properly utilize that advice in the early part of my career. And when you get funding, the first thing you do is build a big team, and I gotta spend this money, and then look at all these smart people, and look at how I'm the boss, and look how many people are working for me. Don't be tempted and fooled by success just by the size of your team. It's really more about who's on your team, how dedicated you are. Are they really there for the same purpose and goal and mission that you have, or are they just mercenaries? And if they're mercenaries, as soon as the time goes bad, as soon as you run low on cash, or the product is delayed, or think customers are not buying, they'll leave, and you're going to be up a creek, right, without a paddle. And you don't want that. You want people that when time to tell people, say, you know what, I'm willing to sacrifice. Just let's all cut our salaries back, or let's all not get paid for the next 6 months, so that we can make the company survive, and we'll still pay the lower level staff, but the senior level, everybody essentially stop getting paid. And I've been in situations like that. And because when you give yourself time, good things happen. Right? But when you run out of cash and you stop paying your team, you stop paying your rent, it's over. It's game over. And that's what you need to do is to, as an entrepreneur, your job is to avoid those kind of situations. And it's tough. It's tough for everybody involved. But when you have people who believe in what you're doing and they feel like they're part of the team, a lot of times you get past those issues and then you get to something amazing because those issues made you tighten your belt, made you rethink your product, made you better understand your customers, and then also make sometimes the market come back because a lot of macro issues go in cycles, and a lot of times you may be ahead of you're ahead of the market. So being too early and being too late are both equally bad. So timing is probably the other advice I would give to entrepreneurs is making sure that you are building something that has the potential in the next 2 to 5 years to actually be available in the market and accepted in the market. If you're more than 5, 7 years out, that product is probably too early and you're going to die on the line waiting for the market to be realized. And both from companies I've invested in as well as being an operator, that's happened to me. And it's really sad when you look back and say, man, I had this really great thing. If I would just 2 years later or 5 years later, I could have really owned that market. And so making sure that you because once you start, the investors are looking at you, the market's looking at you, and they want to see you have continued momentum. Once you start losing momentum, you start losing faith from your investors, from the market, from your employees, from your customers. And so the market has to have an opportunity to be there. So anyways, I'm rambling a little bit, but those are at least a few things that kind of top of mind, and we can keep talking if I can keep talking if you need me to or want me to.
Yeah, no, we're going to have to leave this area, but I'm just going to ask one other question. You got a master in science and business from MIT Sloan School of Management. A lot of people get MBAs together with their tech degree. Really, how much of that was useful?
Let's see. I think most of the things that I learned in business school, I probably could have learned on YouTube or by reading. So at the end of the day, I don't think you go to business school to learn information, to learn facts. You go to business school to build relationships. You go to business school to interact and create a network that will, essentially be part of your assets for the rest of your career. And also to build a brand. And, so when people ask me, I have a lot of young people say, oh, well, I want to go to business school. I'm going to XYZ school. And it's, something that's in kind of the middle tier, but it's going to cost them $100,000 and take 2 years at a time. I'm like, given what you're trying to do and, where you want to go, I don't know if that really helps you, to get in debt, to go and get a brand that, nobody really knows and cares about. So if you're going to get into a top 10, top 20 school in the world, whatever, by all means do it because you're going to meet some of the smartest people in the world, and that will be helpful to you whether or not you learn any, and you will learn stuff, right? But if you go to a middle tier school, then you could have learned all of that, and you probably won't have met people, and the brand that you get with it won't help you because people won't value it. And it's sad that people don't. There's such a tiered system in terms of what they value, and that money and time and the distance that you have from a corporate path or an entrepreneurial path may actually have slowed you down in terms of your career mobility. So I mean, I don't know. Some people may disagree with this point of view, but at least that's the advice I would give to a young person in that situation.
So Alvin, I realize now we're running out of time, and I wish we had booked like 2 hours because we got like 8 minutes left. So I'm just each one of the areas and the advice is so great, like it's experiential, combined with sort of the academic stuff, but it's really a lot of the experiential, which you can't get anywhere except by you doing it, right? So just a remarkable every nugget. There's a lot of nuggets in here. Okay, so I just want to spend a little bit of time on you with Intel and IBM and working on chips, and then I want to get into HTC and your AR, and then get into your book and what are some of the gems in your book, and then spend some time into the future. But we only have like 8 minutes, so we got to kind of condense this down. Okay,
Yes.
so Intel and IBM working on chips. Tell me what you did and what you learned.
Um, what I did was well, with IBM was really more about chip design. So it was what became the PowerPC chip. And at the time, it was using essentially ARM instruction sets, not ARM, but RISC instruction sets to do something where Intel was using the CISC, the complex instruction sets, right? And seeing the two paths and the two companies, how their culture. Actually, what I learned the most is how to operate in a large corporation and how to scale. That was probably the biggest thing I learned, because from a technical perspective, I learned a lot of that, or most of that already in my undergrad degree. But from a how to operate in a large company where you get things done, and one of my stints was actually having an opportunity to work with all the executives in Intel, and that was something that gave me exposure to how people thought, how issues were decided. And those are kind of things that really last with you, because when you start doing an entrepreneurship role, you don't have those mentors around. That's the tough part of being a startup founder, is that there's nobody else to advise you. There's nobody to tell you the details. So go ahead.
So why is Intel in trouble? And you just saw the CEO accident, right? So.
Yeah. Well, so I was actually talking to a friend about this the other day. Intel went away from what it was good at, right? When I was there, Andy Grove was a CEO, and he was a visionary. He was a person that thought 5 years, 10 years ahead, and we had plans that were 5 years, 10 years ahead. And we stuck to them, and we knew what we were good at. We were good at design, we were good at manufacturing, and we were good at creating a instruction set that every developer built to. Right. And unfortunately, all the manufacturing got outsourced, to the rest of the world. That there was waves of changes going to mobile that Intel didn't climb onto. The leadership went from being technically oriented people who knew the business, who knew the technology, to being sales and marketing people and finance people who was quarterly driven. And they made decisions that looked good on paper short term, but really did not make sense and took advantage of the core advantages of the company. So it's a very unfortunate. And even with Pat Gelsinger coming back, and Pat was the youngest VP when I was there, so everybody looked up to him. He was like a little kid walking around the halls, but he was the VP. And he left. But when he left and he came back, if I should say that, but I was talking to some friends in Intel, and they're like, he's been gone for 10, 15 years, and he thinks the company is still what it used to be, and he's trying to operate us like we used to be, and we're not the same company anymore. And he also doesn't have the grip on the industry as much as he did when he was actually part of it. And for him to be telling people who are there what to do when he didn't have enough details, and there was a lot of resistance internally, and there's been so much turnover, so many good people have left the company. So anyways, but this could go on and on. But yeah, so I think it's a lot of missteps and just the wrong leadership. I think that's the core difference. So, and when Andy passed, I think everything just kind of went south. So.
Okay, so now let's get into very quickly your HTC journey, sort of the AR/XR, and your what you did and some of the lessons, and then I definitely want to get into your book and some nuggets there, and then where do you see the future going? And we got about 5 minutes left, so.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, I started in VR/AR in early 90s with the HIT lab, which is the first non-military research lab on VR in the US, and studying with Tom Furness, who is the godfather of VR. So I was very fortunate, again, to be in the right place at the right time, and to have access to some of the latest technology at the time. There was several $100,000 for these systems, and headsets that were 2.5 kilograms. Now we're down to these things that are like 200 grams, or these kind of glasses that are now 30, 40 grams, right? So we're and a few $100s, right? So to have seen the progress in this industry, we will soon see the device on our face as the primary interface device that we will have with computers and with each other. It was going to replace the screens that we have on our desk and in our pockets, and it's gonna happen over the next 5 years. So I'm very bullish in terms of where this industry is going, and I think it will. And the foundation understanding is actually very easy, because we live in the 3D world. We live and we have optimized ourselves in the 3D space. So our computing on interface should be 3D instead of this 2D screen that we are looking into right now, that we've been forced to use that because that's the only thing available and accessible. But very soon, when a 3D experience is fully available to everybody, we can use it much more naturally. So quick answer to your question on the AR VR. So
Yeah, and you've held some of the most senior leadership roles at HTC, right? I mean, developing the Asia marketplace, and you're global VP, and you were a founder of the Vive Global VR Accelerator together with the SOSV Mobile Internet Investment Incubator before that. But so you have all of this tremendous background on top leadership. HTC used to be like, it was like this big battle, and they were like up there amongst the best. And then, of course, I guess because Meta's huge investment, it's just hard to compete against that, right?
yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day is you have to choose your battles, and you have to choose your markets. And different companies have different advantages. So a company like Meta, which has tens of millions of dollars of free cash flow coming in from the advertising business, they can execute a certain strategy, which they did, which is essentially subsidizing hardware and subsidizing development and really paying to buy and market. And HTC, a company that's a fraction of its size, without that cash flow, was dependent on devices that they actually make money from. And so we essentially pivoted from being initially very consumer oriented to becoming much more B2B oriented, where the customers valued and is willing to pay for a higher quality product, and then pay a premium that actually allowed us to gain profits from our sales. Whereas essentially Meta was losing hundreds of dollars per device to buy a market. And in some ways it makes sense for them, because for Zuck, he just wants to have market share, because he felt like he lost the opportunity with the phone business, where now he's under the control of Google and Apple, of what they decide in their policies and how that affects his business. So he wanted to get ahead of that by getting into the space. So I understand, different companies make their choices based on who they are and what they have. So,
I mean, you still have these leadership roles in the space, right? Chairman of the Virtual World Society, vice chair of the Industry
yes,
and VR Alliance, president of the Virtual
yes,
Reality Venture Capital Alliance. I mean, you're really still embedded in many ways. And you have this marvelous background of leadership, right? And a tremendous sort of deep history of innovation, entrepreneurship. You name it, you've done it. Okay, let's talk about your book and why this book, and because this whole idea of reality and this next reality sort of got superseded by AR, or I should say AI. Why this book? Why should people read it? Why maybe 2 or 3 nuggets in your book?
Yeah, I think that the key point of why I wrote this book with Lewis is because we feel like we are entering a very special time, where it's an inflection point for the world and for our society. And we have a responsibility, our generation and the generation right below us that is actively working in the industry and policymaking, to make some choices. And unfortunately, the world isn't aware, really, or most of the world is not, doesn't have a clear understanding of what's coming, and doesn't understand how the impact of their decisions. And so we created a format where it's a debate between Lewis and I, where I play the optimist and he plays the pessimist. So we're forcing every reader to hear both sides of an argument, of the key points that are going to be affecting how these technologies are going to be affecting our world. And at the end, we essentially said, okay, you make up your own mind based on what you heard, but here are the things we need to do as a society in your role, whether you're an AI researcher or a policymaker or a corporate leader or a student or a, whatever. What are you going to do? And there's sections for each of them to have a positive impact. And so the key is really, we want this book to be something that gets people to take action, not just read it, feels good, and then they put it away. Because most people buy books that are consistent with what they already believe, and they'll just make them feel smarter because, like, oh, look, the author says everything I believe, I'm so smart. But they only saw one side of the story. And every technology is a dual-edged sword, and it can be misused for bad, if we allow it to be. So I wanted to make sure that people see both the potential of the good it will do as well as the bad. And I think it's not too late. It is not too late for us to make a difference. And that's why I wrote this book. So
Okay, so in 2 minutes, give me your predictions of where things are going. So we have, and let's go into not just AR, VR, but also AI, supercomputing, quantum computing, maybe analog computing, probabilistic computing, thermodynamic. I mean, you name it. Just where are things going, and snapshots? Where do you see the world going in the next 4 or 5 years?
yeah, that might take more than 2 minutes, but I'll give you kind of a few nuggets. I think we are going to get to a point where AGI will be a real thing. It's been something that's been in sci-fi for decades, if not longer. And we are on the cusp of that happening. And when AGI becomes a reality, it will have an opportunity to help us solve some of the aching points that our society has been dealing with for millennia. So we will be able to, solve the climate issue, the energy issue, the food issue, the health issues that has plagued our society. And I think that will fundamentally alter how we live and, why we live, and the conflicts that exist in this world. I know I'm talking in very grand points, but and it feels very hype. And because these changes really are that big, and like you say in your talks, there's going to be 1,000-year changes in the next 5 years. I'm thinking more like 100 years, but it's a lot of change. There's a lot of change coming, and there's no way to capture that in 2 minutes. But I think that the key is the things that are fundamentally driving how our economy and how our society works today are going to fundamentally be altered. And our purpose for life will be fundamentally altered, where we are in the past so focused on a scarcity mindset and so focused on gaining status and money. We need to start changing how we think, because the value of money is going to dramatically decrease. And why do you work, and what do you do at work, and do you even work, is going to completely change. There's definitely going to be a lot of technical advances, as you mentioned earlier. I don't think we need to get into all of those details, because essentially every aspect of technology and product and economy is going to be altering. So there are just too many to name. But and the interface that we will have, I really do believe we will be becoming to have a more natural interface. We're going to have devices in our head that will increase our IQ points by hundreds of points, so that the average human will know almost everything. Will be able to be advised by a tutor or a mentor on your shoulders that will give you the best advice of how to be the best version of yourself, and how to make the best decisions that you are dealing with. All those things that we talked about earlier in the interview of, the difficulties being an entrepreneur will not be as difficult, because you will always have somebody who's on your side, who understands, who's gone through these things, and who's seen all of history and math and science, and be able to advise you in how to think about this. I wish I had something like that when I was growing up, but you will not have that in the way to use it as an advantage to beat the market. You will have that as a way to make you a better version of yourself, so that whatever you can contribute in a higher capacity. And I think that's the difference in mindset. It used to be, I want to make the best decision so I can win. I think in the future, we will say, I want to make the best decisions so I can contribute the most to the world.
So, Alvin, I was really impressed with your keynote at this Futureport Youth Conference. It was so thoughtful. I mean, even though I was being interviewed, I could hear parts of it. I was there for probably three-quarters of it. Then I had to go to an interview, but I thought it's incredibly thoughtful keynote. Are you making that keynote available anywhere? And then I guess, what's
Um,
your final recommendation to the audience?
I think the keynote should be posted by the organizers in the next week or two. So I'll add me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, and I'll make sure that's available. Um, I think my advice to your audience in general is spend time to learn things deeply, and by learning things deeply, instead of just relying on 10-second TikToks or a quick post on X, really read books, really listen to long form podcasts like we're doing today, and spending time talking to experts in the field. Because I think when you have that depth of knowledge, you will be able to think critically, you will be able to make better decisions, and you will be able to challenge things that you hear, because a lot of what we hear in media is a one-sided picture. It is not the whole story, and you need to understand the whole story so that you can make the right decisions.
Alvin, this was an incredibly just an amazing exchange. I mean, I could do a whole series just on you. So thank you for coming in. It's just a wonderful, remarkable, outstanding career, which continues. And so many different contributions in so many unimaginable ways. And you're so prolific. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with my audience.
No, thank you for inviting me, and I'm also just honored that I'm able to share a screen with you, and congrats on all the things that you've done throughout your career. I am very glad that we got to meet up.
Yeah, continue success. So thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.